Testing. 1, 2. Close enough. So the tests are all graded. The average grade was an 85. It actually was very, very close to the averages of the rest of the tests. So actually the disparity was a lot less than I normally have because there's usually a trail into the 50s and into the hundreds, and it was a little bit more narrow than that. I think the ones where I've talked about is the essay questions that people tripped on. And, the very simple answers that just required a phrase like the multi-channel is customer centric while the omni-channel is customer driven. That's all I asked for. If I saw 3 or 4 paragraphs, I'm wondering where, it doesn't matter. Didn't mean I looked at it that way. But anyway, good job. Good job. So without further ado, we're going to start the last 3 chapters, which are actually, once again, my favorites. So the last 5 or 6 weeks generally of the semester are really good chapters, because it's important also to understand that when dealing in channels, which may be a lot different from supply chain in this way, is that marketing has always been people-centric and people-driven. The 4 Ps are not just about the manipulation, it is the delivery and interaction with people, which I think is one of the most important things to talk about. So when you look on the As You Learn site, this is not, well, no, excuse me. This will be one of those bonus questions. You do not have to recognize this, but the next 3 chapters, you may have a question on who was the authors of this. But the next 3 chapters are very much tied into the idea that marketing is to be a continuous line instead of an easy transition in which the consumers never ever touch each other again. So for much of business, we think of transaction as being discrete. And so in other words, one transaction does not necessarily lead into another. The ideal, if we were to talk about a discrete transaction, Hyde described it as being where you would drive up to a gas station, pay cash, and never come back again. The truth is that that style of business is a myth, and it always has been. One of the things also to realize is that when we talk about research this, we're not talking about the founding or creation of something. Many times it's just the observation that this is how it exists and how it works. So this article, written in 1994 by Robert Morgan and Shelby Hunt, is one of those game breakers, one of those paradigm shifts in our understanding of how marketing works and also how the consumer interaction with the buyers exist and how to do it successfully. So this is the theory called commitment trust, and it was the groundbreaking article that set on the interactions of where we really understand how consumers and buyers interact with each other and how we go about bringing value. If you ever get passed into the MBA status, and then, of course, even into the PhD status, you make me proud if you do that. This is one of those groundwork seminal articles that you'll be talking about and reading forever and ever. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of these things, but there are some things in these next 3 chapters that we're going to talk about. And I want you to know that the things that are in the books do exist in the research that we do as well. So nobody makes up anything in a book. The stuff that comes from the books comes from the groundwork here. So discussions of just-in-time procurement in the 80s and 90s. Cooperation, functional conflict, which will be in the next chapter. The benefits, the shared values, and this commitment and trust. And we'll talk about trust, especially in the final chapter when we talk about relationships. This major article confirmed that we build relationships. Relationships are grounded in trust. And when we have a trusting relationship, we can go through difficulties and still survive. And it might seem that the word or the 2 words functional conflict don't seem to be consistent with each other. It actually is, and we'll see that in the next chapter. So anyway, this is the stuff, by the way, if you ever look at serious research, they call these endogenous variables. So like you'll see these things that say communication. What they actually are is a representation of like 12 questions. And these questions basically are kind of ways of looking at things that we can't see with our own eyes. And so how do we see what a shared value is? Well, it's pretty much like seeing a planet that is orbiting a sun that we can't possibly see, but we can only measure. That's the same thing with research that we do with this. So, leading into that, it's time to talk about power, conflict, and relationships. So, what is power? Because we are human beings, and in the channels, we have independent organizations that are interdependent of each other. It is natural as human beings to have relationships built on power, to have conflict, and the desire to have long-term relationships. Every element of marketing channels is permeated by some consideration of power. In 1994, Walmart decided that every vendor, in order for them to stay a vendor, must become part of what they call their vendor management system, or VMS. The vendor management system, they as a vendor, in order to stay that way, they had to invest in thousands and thousands of dollars in equipment and software and be able to show competency in those pieces of software as well. If you look at it on the open, it looks like a very heavy-handed thing that Walmart did, almost like twisting the arms of the vendors. What do the vendors get anything in return? And actually, the answer is yes. What the vendors got is the ability to see all of their goods everywhere in the marketing channel, in every store, in every warehouse in the world, real time. That is an enormous advantage that you gave to the vendors. It was a very difficult thing for them to do, but ultimately what it did is it allowed Walmart to become the #1 manager of channels in the world. And I think we can safely say they still belong there. If I were going to unwind what is the core competency of Walmart, there's no question it has to do with their channel system. Problem with power is that it is a very abstract thing, just like I was talking about. How do we measure shared values? How do we measure any of the things? Trust. What is the common measuring stick that we use? Well, the problem is in those abstract terms, it's very difficult and hard to understand. So what we hope to do is use a system which is at least organized, perhaps a little bit of guessing, but it gives us the best way of understanding what we're trying to deal with when it comes to power. So how do we estimate power? There's two ways. The first thing we're going to talk about today is what are the 5 different types of powers. On Thursday, we're going to talk about the flip side, which is dependence, how dependent each organization is on each other. It is important to understand that power is seen by its influence. Influence, for the definitions for the test, influence is the ability to alter or altering what would have been the course of events if there was nothing in play. Exercising of power is the exertion of influence. And so, with that as a background, now we're going to talk about power. And this is the definition that you will see and you'll use on the test. So, power is the ability of one channel member A to get another member of channel member B to do something it otherwise would not have done. So we talked about influence, the altering of behavior. It's important to understand that power isn't just influence, it is the potential for influence. Power, as I said before, is very difficult to understand and diagnose because one of the problems is that many times, members would have done what you wanted anyway. And so I'm asking you to pay the bills on a biweekly schedule. And the channel member B said we were moving to that anyway, so no big deal. On the open side, it would look like, well, I got them to be influenced when in essence you didn't. That's what a false positive is. It is hypothetical, speculative, it's impossible to verify, and yet it exists. And we study it because in understanding, sometimes we have influence ourselves. Just remember that B is going to do their best to pursue their own economic self-interest. And sometimes things happen without their use. Now, what is good power and why do we study it? It's important to understand that maximizing the system's profit is not the same as maximizing each member's profit. Did Walmart succeed in raising their profit in doing the vendor management system? The answer could be possibly, but it also meant they invested millions and millions of dollars into a computer system before the vendors ever did. Is power good or is power bad? Is this good or bad? Is it good or is it bad? It's a good question, isn't it? It is a thing.
Yeah, like what's it do for us?
Exactly.
That's right.
Right, exactly. Does in and itself have a power of good or bad? And the answer is no. It's like anything that is a tool, all right? After the hurricane, without chainsaws, we couldn't have gotten to the place we were going. Chainsaws were good. It is also can be used as a bad thing. It is important to understand that that's what power is. Power and conflict and all the rest are neither good nor bad. It is their application that decides it. And so the right application of power generally tends to be when it is good for the system and not for a single member. That is a key point about power. Power can be good when the entire system has an advantage. This is what Walmart did. Initially, when they did this in '94, they came about as being somewhat of a bully. But in the long run, they made the companies that they were working with better. A good coach can make you feel like they're bullies, but a good coach will reach inside of you and bring something out that you never thought you had. When Jerry Jones bought the Dallas Cowboys, people don't know this, but the Cowboys were losing $50 million a year. They were America's team. How could they possibly lose that money? And the first thing that Jerry Jones did when he became the owner is fire Tom Landry, who was the coach of Dallas for 30 years. He was synonymous with Dallas. The next thing he did was he wanted to band all of the company or all of the NFL teams together so that they sold all of their goods under one umbrella. So instead of having just a Dallas Cowboys store, excuse me, and we're talking about 1989, and a New York Jets store, which made less money than every other one, and the Dallas Cowboys that made 3/4 of all of the revenue generated in those things, he brought them all into one umbrella under what's called NFL properties. Now, how did it affect the Dallas Cowboys? They made less money instead of more for the first 5 or 10 years. And he got ridiculed of being a hick. But what did he do? Within the first 10 years, NFL properties grew 20 times. The revenue generated now from NFL properties, which actually reaches to each individual player now. Every player that has a jersey that's being sold, they get a cut. Every NFL member from 1989 on owes Jerry Jones a debt of thanks. And he got kicked around at the beginning, but he did something that made good for the system. And NFL has never been the same. I'll just go a little bit further. When they built the Dallas Cowboys' new stadium, the stadium was supposed to cost $150 million. He said he would raise half of the money if the Dallas-Fort Worth area could raise the other half, which was $325 million. They floated a bond issue. A bond issue is not a tax. It is basically a loan that you have to pay back. They paid that back by doing a parking tax and a tax in the hotels that are around that area in Arlington. Came up, it wasn't $650 million. It was actually $1.15 billion. So what did Jerry Jones do? He didn't go back to the people of Texas. He reached in his pocket, got $500 million and paid for it himself. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. One of them is before they even overturned one piece of dirt, he was making money. Jerry Jones had sold AT&T Stadium. They were making money before they ever built the property, which is one of the things that I always say about Jerry Jones is no manager. Jerry Jones is a marketer. That's what he did. Okay, anyway, I'm going on. But let me also say this, he started a standard now in the NFL. When they build stadiums, there are some that still try to threaten to move to somewhere else, but that's no longer the play. If you go to Atlanta, you can get a hot dog for $4. Can you believe that? You can get a beer for $5 because they've lowered concession prices because they got a heat from Jerry Jones because he was doing the same thing. Anyway, I'm going on. This is the good use of power. When it's good for the system, that's the good thing. The usage of it is up to the decision maker, the wielder of the power, and that was Jerry Jones, and he did it with great success. So, when you do research in psychology, and you try to find where power comes from, marketing likes to dig into psychology and leadership. If you would go looking in leadership psychology, you find the same thing. So like during the 80s, there were like articles after articles on power in marketing, especially in channels. There was like, oh God knows how many. Finally, at some point, the seminal article or the journal for channel said, we're not writing anymore on power. We're through with it. But power in channels still breaks down to these 5 main ones. So you're not going to write these first because we're going to talk about them one at a time, but these are the 5 sources of power. Power can only be exerted by having something of value that appeals to the influenced. If I cannot appeal to you, if I don't have something you want, need, or desire, I have no power. And so, start the first one. First is reward power. It's exactly what you might think it is. Reward power is, oops. I didn't do that. Nobody saw it. Anyway, reward power is a benefit that is given in return for a channel member's agreement to alter their behavior in some way. So reward power. You do this, I'll give you a cookie. I tell my daughters, if you do your homework before 3:30, you can have a cookie. Usually, when we talk about reward power, we're usually thinking of financial rewards. If you're willing to take on this particular product line, we'll give you a 20% discount or a 20% stipend on everything that you sell. It is not just the willingness, or excuse me, it's not just merely the promise that's important. You have to be willing to grant the reward. You can't just simply speak it, you must do it. The problem with reward power, unfortunately, is that sometimes it's simply insufficient. And the other part about reward power is that it becomes a continuing burden. I finished my homework, where's my cookie? And so reward power is one of those powers that does need to be sparingly used in order to have any foreseeable advantages. You can reward downstream and reward upstream. It helps to boost market performance, but it is not a continuous iterative process. And there's the difficulty also with it. And it's also the difference between advertising and sales promotion. So sales promotions is the desire to alter behavior for the consumer to buy something, usually with a discount, hopefully to erode brand loyalty and have an individual switch. Well, the difficulty with that is, and we've done research over and over, and the truth is, brand loyalty does not erode from sales promotions. Generally, what happens with brand loyalty, it is a failure of trust, in which one side, usually the sellers, in one way, fail to meet their particular promises. So reward power is good, but it is insufficient many times to push consumers into some altering behavior. So the next one is coercive power, naturally. And this is the expectation of punishment by A if B fails to conform to A's influence attempt. And while it represents the flip side of reward power, it is much more coercive in its use. Coercive power is not the absence of reward. It is looked at as an attack on themselves and their business. It can be synonymous with aggression. And what also happens with coercive power is it can provoke retaliation. There's a whole YouTube channel about guys that get laid, or people that get laid off, people of getting laid off who take that and attack the organizations that they were originally with. It is many times the people who are using coercive power are surprised by the intensity of the reaction, but we all react the same way. You're not just merely threatening me, you're threatening everything that I have, including everything I think that is important. Coercive power is only used as a last step. It is an attack. So coercive power. Expert power. Expert power is based on B, the target's perception that A, the influencer, has some special knowledge or expertise. You'll see expert power here. Sometimes it might be listed as expertise. And unfortunately, you might find in the book and on tests, they might mix these things together. They mean the same thing. The problem with this power is that it dissipates in a moment. It only exists if B perceives them as being special. And so expert power is split up into expertise, which is judgment, and information sources, which is data, okay? Usually this wraps into two things. the data that you have, you make summations and make good judgments. And that's where expertise come in. There are many people have a lot of excellent data, but they don't have the ability to make sound judgments. Without the expertise, you don't have it. Not easy to use, and it's very easy to get rid of. The difficulty especially is that if you are the expert, it's very easy for you to give that away simply. When I was a salesperson in Lafayette, Louisiana, when I was working for the computer store, I loved to hear my own voice. That's why I became a teacher. So one of the difficulties is that people would come and they would ask me information, and of course I would give it all away. I'd tell them everything they need to know. Then they go to the store across the street or down the block actually, and they buy the same equipment for less money. Yeah. Casting pearls among swine. Okay. It meant that they had to trust me and trust my information. I was given a high status. But the difficulty also is that many times you're not listened to because nobody likes to be told what to do. And that happens, okay? Because it's so easy to give up with expert power, okay? How do you hold on to expert power? How do you maintain it? Well, one of the ways is you dribble it out in small portions. I had a colleague who was so good. He would like answer just the most basic rudimentary questions. And when it came down to tying all together, he really had it down just about the sales pitch. The customer asked that last question and he would say, you know, hire me and I'll tell you the rest. And he just left it at that. And he was usually sold at that point. The next is, and this is what I hope you're always doing, is continually investing in learning. I'm going to an artificial intelligence seminar in Canada in a month. And this is going to be this other thing that I'm creating a journal article in cognitive trust in autonomous vehicles. You always have to do that. And then transmit customized information. Don't give them general information. Expert power, go away very quickly if they no longer consider you an expert. Just remember, good judgment is what separates data from information. Expert power. Legitimate power stems from two things. Legitimate power has two different phases. One is traditional legitimate. And the other is what's known as legal. So, two types of legitimate power. One is legal legitimate, which is conferred to you by governments stemming from laws, contracts, commerce, all of those obligations that are tied up within the binding of normal day-to-day transactions. Traditional legitimate can be thought of as a handshake. The traditional legitimate exists when in the norms, the values, and the beliefs of the individuals who are in the transaction is what leads them to agree to their particular transactions. A handshake deal. I shook your hand, that's all I need. You told me, that's all I need. Sam Goldman said a verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. I think he's right. That expectation of normal behavior also can sometimes trap you. So I have a story. This is a discussion of legal legitimate and traditional legitimate. So when I started an internet service providership in 2000. In essence, an internet service provider, as you have like today with AT&T and all the rest, Charter, all of those. We started with dial-up internet. I had a total of about 1,900 clients. I'd started on about 60 DSL. We're talking dial-up in the time. So I was making about $42,000 a month. And in 2004, Walmart came along and started $4.95 dial-up internet. In about 3 months, I lost 400 customers. And at that point, I knew seriously I could not exist. I couldn't go on unless I had some kind of renegotiation with AT&T and the phone lines that I had. AT&T quite simply said, no, there are no negotiations. And I tried to point out to them that if you don't, I will simply go out of business. And their own answer was simply, you have to pay your contracts, and that's the way it is. So what happened was after a year, I started racking up about $15,000 a month in debt that I couldn't pay. And I started to get phone calls day and night demanding that I pay. The bill had gotten up to about $135,000, and I was in a bad place. So I talked to my lawyer at the time. His name was Forrest Danton. I'd given him free high-speed access at the time. That's how we took care of my legal transactions. He was a good guy. So I came into him one night and told him where I was and what was happening, and that they were going to come and take literally everything that I had away from me, my house, and name it. Forrest listened for about 5 minutes of my conversation, and then at a break, Forrest said, F them. Now, Forrest was a deacon of the church. He was a judge of the city judge. He was not a county judge. But he looked at me and said, David, I wrote your contracts. You're just a member of the company. You have no power whatsoever, and you own nothing in the firm. He said, close the account, go do something else with your life, and it'll be okay. And that's the reason I'm here now, actually, is I did exactly what he said. So AT&T was using traditional legitimate power, demanding to me that I accept the norms and values and pay, which by legal legitimate power, I had no reason to give them any more money. So I simply closed the account. I think it got up to 160,000 after 2 years. It just went away. But at that time, so did AT&T. They went through a massive reorganization of the company they are now. And I hope those people went out of business. Not that I'm being addictive. Anyway, so that's my story. The difference between, and folks, here I'm gonna go down on you, protect yourselves, all right? Go out and reach out and do whatever you want, but make sure you protect yourself so they can't come get you, okay? I just was lucky. I had a good lawyer. So traditional legitimate, legal legitimate. Referent power. Steve Jobs called me up and said, hey, how's it going? You want to go hang? Like he would do that. But anyway, referent power exists when B views A as a reference and wishes to be identified publicly with A. When we talk about franchising, and we talked about product name franchising, the ability to hang Michelin or Goodyear on your particular door has great value because you have people that are loyal to those brands who automatically come back to you again and again because they want to be able to use those particular brands, and I want to be part of that brand itself. There's a pride carrying that. I mean, all of the Apple stores that you will see are basically third-party stores. They don't have Apple stores themselves other than the ones owned by Apple. But just to put that Apple brand up on your particular store is money in the bank. So before I left Omni Computer Store in Lafayette in the 80s, I was working to be a dealer with IBM, and I was working through their 40-page document, and I went somewhere else. But to have those three big blue letters on in the 80s was very, very valuable. So this is reference power. So how do we group these together? Three of these, okay, legal, legitimate. These are what are known as position power. Okay. That very, just based upon where you are, gives you the power to do it. So my ability to have rewards, to hand out punishments, and then based upon the fact that I signed a contract, all of those are based on positions. Expert, referent, and traditional legitimate are what are known as personal power. These are vested in the individuals themselves, and that's where their power comes from. There are also what are known as coercive power and non-coercive power. In other words, force, and there's really only one, which is, of course, coercive power. Position power is also what is known as mediated power. Mediated power is when you are forced to accept them. They exist naturally where you are in the structures, whether you sign the contracts, those kind of things. Unmediated power is personal power. Because unmediated power comes from B's perception that exists within you. It is your perception that there is power that exists there. If you don't perceive that that exists, they don't exist. And so what do you try to do as a corporation? Well, the truth is that in the position powers, it is just a matter of reference where you exist in those locations. You have, nothing you can do much. If I have a small firm and I'm dealing with, say, Walmart, everything is pretty much cut and dry. I mean, in terms of how I interact with them, the contracts are consistent and there are across the spectrum. And so you have no ability to fix those at all. However, in personal power, in the unmediated power, you have the ability to affect change. You can become an expert. You can become an expert, invest in that, be able to have good information and good judgment, which can ultimately be part of referent power, because individuals will want to flock to you because you have the right ideas and the right answers. And then, of course, traditional legitimate power is when your values and standards are high and sufficient to know that even just a verbal agreement or a handshake agreement is enough. And so these are how the powers work. These are the ones that you can affect. And there are those that you, unfortunately, by position, can't change. Now, you can have greater power if you invest in the unmediated ones, which as the status of your corporation rises, then that can affect your ability to achieve greater reward and greater coercive powers. And so that's the standard. These are the 5 powers, and these are how you're able to invest in them to make your corporations better. All right, voice is gone. I'm going to have to take a rest. We're going to leave it at there. And on Thursday, we're going to talk about dependence and power and what are influence strategies you can use in order to exert power. Okay, y'all have a great time. See you.